Well, welcome to this episode of the Ministry Show. It's one that I'm so excited about because I have across the table from me Alan Briggs, who is a church planter extraordinaire in church planting movements, and he's an author and all that. I will let him talk a little bit more about that. But Alan, thanks for joining us on this episode of the Ministry Show.
Great to be here.
You were an easy yes for some reason. Are you just that nice of a guy?
Well, any chance I can get to hang out with you, Chris, I'm in. I'm in.
Yeah, here we go. Well, church planting is at the core of who you are, but it's bigger and broader than that. And you're more into
launching.
Talk to me about the entrepreneurial thing that you just said.
Yeah. The launching process of really anything is exciting to me. All kinds of folks reach out with a vision to launch a ministry or a nonprofit or an idea or write a book or start a cohort. And really the same principles are there. So I think I get excited about kind of from idea to execution. And then what does it look like to sustain long term? So yeah, that's a good distinction in that, yes, I love church planting, but the seeds that are there really can be applied to almost anything we're starting in the name of Jesus to impact others.
Yeah, you're the master at it. And I know that you focus most of your ministry on church planters. So tell me, why church planters specifically?
Yeah, I love the church planter attitude and mentality that doesn't ask why, it asks why not. Why not do church in this setting? Why not do it this way? There's fresh cement. Some of that's good, some of that's bad or hard. A lot of times folks don't know how to live within that new schedule, which looks like chaos of your family moving to another place, planting the gospel in a new place with new challenges. And so I honestly love the idea of helping teams and individuals get healthy, because I truly believe, like Ephesians 2:10 tells us, that we're all wired for impact. And so that if we can get healthy and realize our identity is in Christ first, build those healthy rhythms, we can impact multitudes of people down the line if we're set up for the long haul. So the seeds of that are in everything that I want to do.
That is a great word, Alan. And I suppose it's the reason why you even narrow your focus down further to start with church planters at the very beginning. And whenever I introduce either you or your book, I'm like, Alan Briggs, he's the 0 to 100 guy. And that means two different things. You're like 0 to 100 quickly, speed-wise, but also you focus on that church plant getting from 0 to 100. Can you talk to me about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the temptation for me is always to go too fast. And I think a lot of other entrepreneurial, what we might call apostolic or spiritual starters, is to go too quickly. Nobody can follow us that quickly. And so I've designed a lot of tools, most of them for myself.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. Will you say that comment again? I think I just heard you say most people can't follow that quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. If we're out of the gate so quickly, the reality is we barely know what we're doing. And we haven't communicated the vision, invited people in, and frankly, we probably don't have a healthy process to sustain that. And so really focusing a lot in that in-between, not just of taking my own heart, my own passion, my own head, and translating it, but how do we actually build a healthy team around us for the long haul? So That's the idea, is not just to be able to take out of the gates from 0 to 100 miles an hour, but things like tools and processes that can slow us down. That has helped me immensely. I've shared those a couple hundred times on a whiteboard, and then eventually I put them into a tool that can help impact other people.
I'm going to start introducing you differently. What I'm hearing you say is it doesn't matter how quickly you get to 100. It matters that you get to 100 in a healthy manner.
Absolutely. And if you look at church plants, sometimes when you grow too quickly, as you know, as you hear of other church leaders, that presents different issues. And so really, I think that healthy growth, right? Fast can be healthy, slow can be healthy. But what does healthy growth look like in us as leaders, in our teams, in our organizations, and ultimately in churches? I love the local church, and I always want to be hooked into equipping church leaders in some facet.
Oh, man, that is beautiful. So, I know that since you work with so many church planters, what do you find is foremost on their mind? Like not an individual, but in general.
Yeah, there's ultimately a heart to reach a new component or niche of people and to do new things. And sometimes that becomes an idol. I think in our culture, if you back up beyond church planners or church leaders, we bow to the idol of impact. And the reality is it's this conundrum of leadership, I call it, in that when we aim at impact, we find ourselves unhealthy, and the teams and organizations and churches we lead. But when we aim at health, we always find impact. God's wired us for impact. He's wired his church for impact. And so much of it is, if we can get healthy, what does that look like? And ultimately in heart, soul, mind, and strength, we see some amazing things happen, especially in the long haul. So I think a lot of church planners try to go too quickly and try to just see those measurements and those metrics. Some of that, ironically, provides or perhaps doesn't provide for their family. And so it feels very pressurized, very emotional, very personal. And if we can pull that back and essentially show just a different way and posture to come about church planting. I like big churches, I like small churches, but I love healthy churches.
Yeah. So I think I heard you say the idol of impact.
Yeah. We bow to that. That is our golden
Tell
calf.
me what you mean by that.
I think just the idea that I'm going to make something of myself, that I'm going to have a great missionary report to send back overseas, that I'm going to tell the people that are supporting me, who I've already sold the vision to, that it's working and your money is invested well here. Not all bad things, but certainly can lead us quickly off this road where we're essentially trying to do things that God is responsible for, and ultimately we neglect things that He has made us as stewards responsible for. And one of those, I think, is self-leadership, leading ourselves and being set up for this marathon called life and ministry.
So help me understand, if I'm addicted to impact, and even to the point of making that an idol is what I hear you saying, how would I know if that's the case?
I think to ask yourself, what are you aiming at and why? And just that Simon Sinek, start with why, such a key concept for all of us, because we've skipped over the why and often we haven't even thought about it, or we don't think about it the next week. So I think to push too quickly on that, it's measurable, but it's not always sustainable. And so the things that we can get measured, and they say in any culture, what gets celebrated gets done. And so the question to any church leader, any ministry leader is, what are you celebrating? And what's your mechanism for capturing those stories and ultimately retelling those to God's people?
So let's pretend I'm a church planter real quick, and you're coaching me, which you coach many, and you ask me the question, well, Chris, what have you celebrated recently? And I'm like, well, my anniversary.
And I'd say, awesome, good. Did you take time away? Does your wife think you celebrated well? Did you let the stress and adrenaline down? Absolutely. I think it starts in family. I was just with our staff team and leading, asking, what are you celebrating? What are the highs from your summer? And I think it so easily goes to the lows, the areas that are bleeding out in our ministries. There's always a squeaky wheel. But can we celebrate that you are 1 year further in your anniversary and still married, hopefully happily married and thriving? Absolutely, I think we need to start at the heart of a leader. Here's an analogy that has just taken over my heart. I'm a gardener, and surprisingly, my garden's doing awesome this year. But each day, I go outside and I check the garden in the evening, and the reality is, I'm not seeing any beans yet. The squash is not huge yet, but I go and say, whoa, it grew 4 more inches today. And wow, it's snaking around the pole. Isn't that exciting? Can we celebrate the progress without essentially taking a spiritual Instagram pic of this massive load of fruit? You know, look at our 74 baptisms. Hey, this guy's walking with Jesus. This family's been shaped in the image of God. Those are two different things. How do we celebrate in process or in progress?
Okay, so what if I'm a church planter and I haven't celebrated anything within the ministry, like maybe ever?
Well, sometimes it's mindset, and I'd say most times it's mindset. We're not looking hard enough. But ultimately, if we're running after the wrong things and we've set up some pretty unrealistic metrics, I see that a lot with planters, who we're measuring against, we're at totally different spots. Their life or their ministry or their church is not our church. And ultimately, if every church is looking to the largest, fastest growing churches in the country, then you're going to feel pretty discouraged on a regular basis.
Okay.
So I think comparison kills creativity.
So tell me some of those things that you said that we're measuring against. What would 2 or 3 of those be?
I think rate of growth in a church, right? Here's how fast we went maybe from 0 to 100. Here are the amount of ministries we've launched, which ultimately kind of needs more management and leaders. Here's the size of our core team. I'm a huge fan of teams, but it doesn't mean that you need a core team of 70 people. You could have a solid 7 people that either moved to a new place or raised up for that. So I think measure it. How do we measure the quality of people's growth and discipleship? Those are hard things to put a finger on. They really are.
And since you're so experienced, give me 1 or 2 of the quality measures that you would coach a church planter and saying, hey, make sure that you're measuring. Fill that blank in for me.
I sat with one yesterday and I said, so you took your retreat. That's pretty normal this time of year, but maybe in August, September, heading into the year, what did you spend your time on? And they spent over half the time focusing in on the hearts of those leaders, focusing on their personal discipleship and their families, praying for one another. You can measure what percentage of your retreat did you give to discipleship matters. And so you do have to work a little bit harder on the metrics, but that was something I celebrated and said, man, you're shaping your team. And in the long haul, that is ultimately going to grow them and usually ends up in growing the depth, at least, of your church. Can't guarantee numbers,
beautiful.
But the depth of your team, and you can feel that cohesion.
Very good. So what is the most helpful insight that you can give a church planter?
If you're aiming for the long haul, then you will do things differently today. And set up today what you hope to live in and exist in, really in terms of a healthy culture tomorrow. And by tomorrow, I mean in 5 years, in 10 years. I talk to a lot of teams about setting up sabbatical and saying, I know you don't feel like you need it now, but in 5 years, you're going to be really glad that you're a church that celebrates rest and sabbatical. So I sit with church planting teams and say, who's responsible for this in the bylaws or the Constitution, wherever we need to put this in your crazy documents, so that we build this in for the life of the planters. So don't wait until you're exhausted to really add Sabbath and rest. You're never going to feel like you can, quote unquote, give that time to Sabbath. And that's really when we can't afford not to. Maybe a lot like tithing is to say, you don't just, naturally make $100,000 and they go, okay, now it's time to tithe. The same is true of our time. The same is true of health. Sabbath is one that I push on, and I'm really old school when it comes to Sabbath, in that that's where we recharge. That's where creativity comes from. Yeah, burning the candle at both ends doesn't help anybody in the long run.
But the weekend's coming, Alan.
The weekend's coming.
Give me a break.
Plan well. We throw that phrase around all the time, and ultimately we all know what that feels like. But sometimes it's a planning issue. That we get more excited that the weekend's coming, and we can adapt more as we've planned more. And I think there's this idea that the Holy Spirit can only move last minute. And I don't know about you, Chris, but the Holy Spirit has been known to move 6 months in advance for me. Has been known to actually speak to me through preparation. And so we talk about that a lot. We laugh about that and debunk some of those lies, but flying by the seat of our pants usually doesn't honor God through the intention or lack thereof we're leading with.
Very good. Good wisdom there. Hey, let's talk about a couple common roadblocks that you've seen to church plants already started, let's just say. Are there any common roadblocks from like 0 to 50 or something, in that kind of bigger than a small group, obviously, kind of that mid-sized situation? And then I'd also like to hear, is there other stepping stones where it's like, oh, this is a little bit different animal. It used to be a puppy, now it's a full-grown dog.
Yeah, well, Mac Lake, a friend of mine, leadership guru, says that if on a Sunday morning or in a gathering, you're the one responsible for everything, if something goes wrong, then ultimately you haven't multiplied your leadership. And so I think there's a lot of folks who ultimately are still responsible for every area of their church at 30, 40, 50 people, and nobody really learns to do ministry without them. They don't become an equipper. So I think starting with that posture of an equipper versus that idea of just doing everything. So I have this big sign on my wall that says, don't just do, develop. And so how do we set that as a saint equipper kind of from day one? Our teams will recognize, they will feel empowered or kind of stepped on. Another big one is to think, if God brought you more people, what would you actually do with them? And we ask that question in a discipleship sense. If somebody's at 50 people and aiming at that 100-person mark, well, so if God brought you 50 folks, what's your plan to disciple them, to deepen their relationship with the Lord? So ultimately, I think it's a stewardship issue that we need to have a plan in place before the folks are there. And then I think a lot of it is mindset, Chris. So much has to do with the mindset of, if it's always Sundays coming, if here's the next thing, kind of on Google, when you're on the Maps app, sometimes you just got to zoom out and you got to see the greater area and go, oh, that's where I'm at. I'm in Southern California, but I have no idea where I'm at until I zoom out and get a greater picture on that. So can we just zoom out? Weekends help us to do that. Vacations help us to do that. And a team around us helps us to do that.
Yeah, so can I do that on my own? Or it's probably a big reason you do the coaching, right?
Yeah, I think there's something that other people in community can bring us that we absolutely can't see ourselves. So what I say is most churches, church plants especially, don't have the resources to do all of those things in terms of health that we really need to be doing. And so an outside perspective, I do give a warning. I think one of the barriers, Chris, is that we overstudy. We overread. Church planters might read 50 books, and they might talk about 25 different models in those 50 books with 16 different silver bullets and 27 different ideas you have to do in year one. So a lot of these guys are absolutely overwhelmed. Yeah. And they don't truly know the identity of their church. They know 50 different identities that you heard in books of people that it worked for. And so if books become an idol, ultimately got to go back to our identity in Christ and to the Word. You're probably laughing because you've seen that.
Well, I didn't know until just now that church planters and small group pastors are from the same ilk.
There you go.
So I coached a few church planters, but mainly small group pastors. And often the very first thing I have to do is quit reading books.
That's good.
Yep. So I just heard that same thing from you, which is why I was chuckling. Let's keep focusing on these church planters and all that. Because of your experience and the number of people that you're engaged with, not only currently, but that have coached in the past, I'd love to know if you could wave a magic wand and eliminate the biggest restriction to church planting, what would that magic wand get rid of? What would you make disappear?
I think I ultimately would make the old idea, which is currently disappearing, so perhaps God's waving the magic wand, of parachute planting. I think that The old idea of entering into a place thinking that, it's you and your spouse against the world. Ultimately, that's the battle of marriage. That shouldn't be the battle of ministry. And
yeah, but Rick Warren can do it. So, I mean,
there you
come
go.
on, man.
Rick did it. We see the one or two kind of freak shows that had this amazing opportunity at the right time, incredible gifting. Most of us are not wired like Rick Warren. And so, yeah, I think we see those opportunities. I'm seeing more and more team. And so if we could just truly see people understanding that they need the variety of giftings. We see that in Ephesians, and really coming back to apostles, prophets, evangelists, shepherds, teachers, really, which is God's well-rounded ministry team. And I'm seeing more teams launch understanding they do this and I can't do that. We can do this together. So I think I would wave the magic wand and say team is not just a good idea, it's a necessity for your own health and for the impact of your church.
Let me shift just a little bit and talk a little bit more about you personally and the ministry that you have and that you offer and that you're helping so many people. Why are you coaching church planters?
Yeah, I'm passionate about coming alongside, and there are very few neutral voices. If you think about it, in ministry, everybody seems to want something from you. And to have somebody that can come alongside of you in covenant relationship, you've agreed on it ahead of time, there's a lot of hunger, there's a lot of buy-in. I will say that I filter pretty carefully for those who I coach. There's a relational fit, there's a financial buy-in, there's a process that we've predetermined. And ultimately, when the filters go up, the sort of purity of the relationship and the impact goes up. I do a lot more filtering than I used to. And ultimately, I just saw there's so many people that are struggling to get healthy. There's a family and there's a team behind these people. And so that the health ultimately leads to impact. And so that's just something that I've seen from 100 different angles, from our physical health and stress levels. Step in any group of pastors, and we're probably not the ideal picture of health. We're probably stressed. We're probably checking emails on a couple different accounts on our phone. We're probably not looking people in the eye. We probably feel like our schedule is way overbooked. That is not what God intended for the leaders of his church, I don't believe, and I think we've skewed that.
Oh, wow. Now, I know you're an author too. I read Guardrails. So why are you writing books?
I'm writing books because somebody can read on a beach without me there with them. And it makes this great multiplication of the impact. A friend of mine and I were talking about this idea of Paul versus Apollos. Apollos is just a guy that was charismatic. People wanted to hear from Apollos, and many would say that Paul was not that great of a speaker or an orator, and ultimately we only know about Apollos because Paul wrote about him. So I have this theory that God had to put Paul on ships and then shipwreck him and put him in jail to write half the New Testament, because chances are he probably wouldn't have just sat down with extra time and a cup of coffee to do that. And so I have learned to chain myself to the desk for the sake of a greater reproducible impact, that I don't actually physically have to be there with my mug in their face to be able to have that conversation. Ultimately, God opened the door.
Yeah.
And realistically, it's not something that everybody should do. I hated the idea of writing, never got good grades on writing. But if we can pass some simple principles and stories along, I do believe people can take those in their local context and apply them. I'm a simple guy and I'm a story guy. I'm not the smartest guy in the world, so I'm going to write to sort of the average man, the average leader.
Yeah, that's good. But you're smart enough to create tools. You shared a bunch of them with me that are just super simple and can apply not just church planting, but to virtually just about any ministry situation.
Time is the biggest tool right now that I've seen. Time is not visible until you put it on paper. And that's a simple thought. You can usually look back and analyze time, but we tend not to zoom out with time. We tend to be stuck. Here's my next meeting. And essentially we're going meeting to meeting, but we're hoping to have some great vision to cast. And those two just don't line up. So lately I've just been super geeked out on time. And Wayne Cordero talks about energy management and leading on empty. And how do we manage our energy in the course of the year? So I've created an energy map for the year, like you might have for your house. When do you use the most energy on AC or heat or water? And the reality is we don't use the same every week or every month. And a lot of light bulbs are going on because we're haphazardly planning our time.
Yeah, I actually think that energy management is more important than time management.
Absolutely.
In our ministry. So Alan, what's next for you? What's coming up? What's happening in your world and your ministry?
I'm going to continue to ride this wave, this opportunity, I think, for church leader health. And I truly believe, and I've seen it in myself as I've had to get serious about some areas of my own health, that when we get healthy, we make an impact. And so really, I want to continue to dedicate my best time toward that. And that looks like coaching, looks like sitting down with teams and consulting. And my organization is scaling the team, Stay Forth Designs. ultimately it's about life design and about ministry design. What does that look like to be able to say, we're not Saddleback Church, as amazing as they are and the biggest, impact as they have. We're not this new church plant down the street. We are us, and God has wired us to do that. And so I think that's a life-giving message. So I want to continue to build those tools. And again, I want to write. I want to write not just because I have a fire in my bones, although I do, but because I believe that the church needs tools and simple stories to be able to help equip us for that. Got a book launching this fall called Everyone's a Genius, and I truly believe that everyone is a genius, and I think it's a question of how do we unlock and equip the saints, many times just affirm the saints within our churches. So that's with Leadership Network and Thomas Nelson, and that really is writing to the heart of pastors and church leaders. I think that can be one of those great tools to be able to help unlock congregations.
For those of you that are tapped into this ministry show, if somebody wanted to get a hold of you, find out more about the work that you're doing and the help that you might provide, how would somebody get a hold of you?
Yeah, stayforth.com. That's stayforth.com. It's probably the easiest. AlanBriggs.net as well with a blog there, and can shoot me an email from that. And just a quick note, I created an ebook, a tool called 7 Steps to Launching Your Big Idea that is free and is because I had the conversation 100 times and I realized I should probably develop a tool for this. So it's got questions. You can go there and get that, and that is literally changing people's lives without people having to meet me or sit down or even pay $1 for it. So absolutely free. Go ahead and grab that at my blog.
And that's at your website.
Yeah, AlanBriggs.net. It'll pop up 7 Steps to Launching Your Big Idea. We're going to spin some writers cohorts out of that, continue to coach church planters off those principles. So pretty excited about the impact that that's having.
Oh, fantastic. Well, hey, next week on the Ministry Show, Pam and I are going to debrief our interviews with Sean Lovejoy and this one here with Alan. I didn't tell you that before, but we dissect what you say and have a little bit of fun with it, hopefully. Then once again, we just want to thank our sponsors for their role in bringing you the Ministry Show. If you have a need in one of those areas, click on the link there and you can find out more about those guys. So until next week, I hope you have a great one, and God bless.